This is Karina, and you're listening to Bold, Brown and British, a weekly podcast where we discuss what it means to be a brown person in a Western world. We've spoken about colorism, third culture identity, and dating, amongst many others on this podcast. So if this sounds like the type of content that you want to hear, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts from. You can also message us on Instagram. The handle is @BoldBrownAndBritish, or drop us an email via our website at www.boldbrownbritish.com. So without further ado, let's get on with this week's episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of Bold, Brown and British, where we dispel myths, challenge stereotypes, and most importantly, have great conversations. So those of you that have been listening to this podcast for a while, my OG samosas as they were, you know who you are, know that we like to tackle things that people aren't necessarily talking about, but should be talking about. And today's topic is no different. And as you probably know from the title of the podcast, today we're going to be tackling the topic of STIs, STDs, but most specifically herpes. So I have Marion and Cameron here from HVA, which stands for Herpes Virus Association, and Lena here, who's kind of a member of HVA. How are you guys?
Yes, I am. Hello.
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 So tell me more, Cameron, Marion, I'll start with you. Tell me more about the association itself.
The association was started back in 1985. Herpes simplex has been around since human beings began. But by 85, for various circumstances, people really started being concerned about it. Whereas before, it absolutely just wasn't an issue. You could have a cold sore on your private parts and nobody batted an eyelid. Now, then from the early 80s onwards, people started getting worried about it. And so the charity was formed by people who had been diagnosed and just wanted to share stories, wanted to share experiences. And as we learnt more about it, to share knowledge with each other.
And this might be a bit of a rookie question, but what exactly is herpes? When someone says that, they've been diagnosed with herpes or whatnot, what is it? You said that, a cold sore, but are all cold sores herpes and vice versa?
Yes, they are. That's a very good question. Indeed, all cold sores are caused by herpes simplex virus. There are some people who want to really deny that. But yes, it's a fact that facial infection is just herpes simplex on the face. Genital infection is herpes simplex on the genitals. There are two sorts, type 1 and type 2. But depending on which one it is you catch, you've got type 1 or type 2 on the face or on the genitals. Oral sex, you see, is a very common way for type 1, which tends to be the one that causes facial infection, to land on the genitals, and then you've got a case of genital infection.
Or on the hand, indeed, where it's known as a whitlow, to add to the confusion.
Oh, really? I had no idea about that.
When you think about it, cold sex involves hands. Hands are very active in sex, or at least they should be.
Love
that's a different topic. And therefore, hands can easily get herpes simplex. But because we just call it, as Cameron said, a whitlow, we just don't make a fuss about it at all. You put an elastoplast over it and you get on with your life.
I was just going to say, which leads me to the next question as to how do you get it? How is it transmitted?
You can get a flare-up anywhere on your body that you have caught it. So if you've caught it on your hand, you can get a flare-up on your hand in the same place or nearby. So people who typically get a facial cold sore, let's say they catch it on their upper left lip, their occurrence will be in the same place or maybe the lower right, or it could even appear on the cheek or the chin or the nose, but it will always be in the same area. But herpes simplex is spread through skin-to-skin contact with the affected area when there is virus present, typically on the mouth and the genitals, because these are the places where the mucous membrane, or an easier way of saying it would be that the very thin and fragile skin, these are the areas where where it's most commonly transmitted. For the arm, for somebody to catch it on the arm, for example, they would need a cut or an opening in the skin to come into contact with the virus.
There's a sort of myth that, not STDs and herpes in particular is not that common. It's only the rare, the outsiders that get it. So give us the stats, give us some facts. How many people have herpes in the UK?
Well, the stats that we give out are from Australia. Australians have they're very similar to us culturally and in terms of their sexual habits. So the stats that we give out won't be much different here. And that is that by age 25, 7 out of 10 people have this virus. To not have it by age 30, you'd be in a minority.
I can give you statistics from India if you like. So by the age of 10, 3/4 of children have caught herpes simplex type 1.
Okay.
Remember that if they then grow up and do oral sex on their partner, they will give their partner type 1 genital herpes. And then also in India, by the age of 45, 20%, 1 in 5, has got type 2 virus.
Wow. So, Lena, you're one of the 7 out of 10, the 25%, whatever stats you want to relate to. What is
it's very interesting, isn't it? It's like the person next to you on the bus, they've probably got it.
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing that our callers find quite difficult, and for many people who are newly diagnosed find quite difficult, is they feel very isolated. And the reason for this is most people who catch this virus simply don't notice. I had it myself for 18 years before I realized that I had it. So the most common symptom is nothing. And for those people who do get symptoms, a lot of them don't notice the symptoms at all, or it's passed off as something else. For example, mild thrush or some other minor skin condition, ingrowing hair, chafing after sex, all kinds of things. So lots of people might actually think, oh, what if it's genital herpes? I remember doing this myself. And then they'll go on Google Images and they'll see photographs of genital herpes, but what they're seeing is not your typical day-to-day genital herpes outbreaks. They're seeing, the worst examples that have been photographed for medical journals.
The other thing is that, of course, the people who have it facially don't know it's herpes simplex, and therefore they're not thinking about it in that way and not talking about it and not bothering to say, oh my God, I got, And then the ones who have it genitally aren't talking about it because of the stigma, because we don't talk about genitals. Let's face it, even if you had something innocuous like thrush or hemorrhoids, you wouldn't be telling people about it.
Yeah, it's deemed as socially awkward and people feel a bit odd talking about it. And I think it's particularly in kind of South Asian culture and British Asians, we talk about these things even less. So dial that down by like 70-80%.
But think about thrush or hemorrhoids, as I just mentioned. This isn't something that you bring up in conversation with anyone at all. So why would you bring up your genital herpes with them? Do you follow?
Yeah,
that's fair enough. Yeah, fair point. Yeah, definitely.
So
I remember when I was diagnosed, I was similar to you, Cameron. Didn't know for years what it was. Had really bad outbreaks, never questioned it, didn't have the education about it, and never spoken to anyone, parents at school, anyone about STIs at all. Obviously, we know sex education is pretty dire as well, so it wasn't really taught much in school. And if you did end up with something, you were shamed so much. So if you did have anything, you just wouldn't say anything at all. And when I had my very first flare up after, I don't know, like 20 years, I still didn't know what it was. It was very minor. I went to a clinic and still didn't think much of it. And then I got the results back via text. Then I freaked out because I was like, what is happening right now?
That's really
part
scary.
of the problem.
Yeah, it was really scary.
A big part of the problem is that people just don't talk about it. And although the medical profession don't care where on the body it is, it's medically unimportant. The body doesn't care where on the body it is, but society does. Not in all cultures, but in a lot of cultures, society cares where it is. And that's the problem. We do actually, but very rarely do we get a phone call from somebody who has a cold sore on their face. And some people we've spoken to have even said that they would prefer to get it genitally than on their face, because there it can be hidden. But it affects different people in different ways. The good news for anybody who does get facial cold sores is that they are far less likely to ever notice if they catch it genitally, because they will already have the antibodies.
That's really interesting, and I guess it dispels some of the myths of it's awful, it's terrible, all that, all the scariness that can come with any diagnosis, but particularly one that sounds as mean and scary like herpes.
Exactly, and that is why the statistic from India, which says that by age 10, 3/4 of children have got type 1, is why, in fact, they won't be noticing if they then catch type 2 as adults. The antibody protection they have from type 1 as children protects them against noticing type 2. I can see Sri Lanka. I don't know whether people from Sri Lanka might be listening to the podcast, but there it's by the age of 12 and a half. 3/4 of children have got the virus, type 1 virus. So you see, it's universal. It's not something that's at all rare. It's utterly common, and it's only the few people who notice it, and who have it genitally, who are going to be making an issue of it in their own heads. But as has been said earlier, having it facially is potentially a serious thing, because the virus could recur on the lip, the nose, or even the eye. And if it were in the eye, it would be a problem. A cyclodare would be brilliant at stopping that problem. Whereas genital infection is no problem at all. You could actually have an outbreak every day for the rest of your life. It wouldn't matter medically. Of course, it would be a nuisance, and of course you wouldn't have to, because there's a cyclodare. The only time having genital herpes matters is when a lady catches it just before giving birth. Women who've got it before the pregnancy begins are fine. They can have a normal delivery, even if they have a recurrence at the time of giving birth. That's fine. But women who catch it just before delivery, they are the ones who could potentially pass it to their children. So medically, it's just not an issue. It's a social idea that it matters, not a medical issue.
That's so interesting. I think it's an important distinction to make. You guys spoke about type 1 and type 2. Talk us through what the differences are between the two.
So as we've said, you can catch either type in either place. Oral sex is a common way for type 1 to land up on the genitals. And the reason why that it happens is this. Type 1 likes the face, and when caught on the face, you are more likely to get recurrences there than if you were to catch type 2 on the face. Type 2 is a virus that you could say likes the genital region and will recur more frequently when you catch it genitally than type 1 does. So a person who gets cold sores from time to time on the face is much more likely to have type 1 on the face than they are to have type 2 on the face. And therefore, when they transmit it through oral sex, they give the partner type 1 genitally. Now, that partner is unlikely to get many recurrences because type 1 doesn't like the genitals, and therefore is not so likely to pass it on through straight sex to somebody else. And therefore, it's having type 2 on the genitals that is more likely to be passed on through the straight, unprotected sex.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Both types are quite common genitally. Facially, very few facial cases are type 2. So it's something like, it's less than 5%, I think, Marion, isn't it?
Very low.
Very low, yeah. Yeah. Also, for anyone who ever does get a type 2 on the face, it's a one-off. It doesn't recur on the face.
If you have either type, can you get the other?
You can get the other, but as I was saying when I'm talking about the level of type 1 infection in some countries, if you've got one type, when you catch the other type, you are not going to notice. or at least you are much less likely to notice, because having the antibodies for one type does give you partial protection against catching the other type. That means that when you catch the other type, you are just not going to notice. So it's as good as not having caught it.
And Lena, that is possibly why you and I had it for years without noticing. I mean, the last facial cold sore I had was in 1995. And one of my first questions from Aaron when I joined the HVA was, how come I haven't had one in all those years? And it's quite likely that when from having facial cold sores, which I presume were type 1, I got antibodies from that, which made it less of an impact to the system when I caught type 2 genitally. So It wasn't until many years later, when I was very stressed to run down and had reason to look for it, that I discovered it genitally.
Yeah, no, I was really baffled. I was like, how has this kind of happened this way? Like, because I'd been sexually active for some time and nothing had ever happened. And then with a particular partner, I don't know whether it was a combination of being intimate, being a bit stressed, but it wasn't straight away either. It was kind of halfway through the relationship. Then something happened and I was a bit like, this is very odd. Then I kind of remembered back in like when I was 18, which is when I must have caught it. Then I put 2 and 2 together and I was like, now I'm kind of seeing where this could have come from. Because before I was like, I've not slept with anybody who had it before. I don't know. But yes, okay, that's very interesting. And I mean, it was a intense journey to kind of come to terms with it, which I'm sure you're all familiar with with members that come to you.
Yeah, I was
very scary.
I was going to ask about that, Cameron, Lena, when you first found out, when you first got diagnosed, what were the emotions that were kind of going past you? Because there's this kind of notion that if you get herpes, you'll know who transmitted it to you. And it's a natural reaction, when something not so great like a herpes diagnosis happens, you want to trace back to how it happened, who gave it to me, what could have been avoided, and did they know they had it? Did they just not tell me about it? Why couldn't I tell that they had it? Assigning blame in this way, it can be a way of kind of discharging uncomfortable emotions, and it's quite natural. So I guess I'm quite interested in the first instance to know what your initial thoughts and emotions were around it.
But Bobby, before we go into emotions, we need the facts, which is that it's likely to be caught from the person that you're sleeping with at the time. So usually the incubation period is 4 or 5 days, but it doesn't mean that it has to be the beginning of the relationship. I had a lady on the phone. She had been with a guy, a man, she'd been married for 23 years, and now she'd caught it from him. She knew all along that he had it. And therefore, we know that it wasn't that he'd just gone out and been unfaithful, but it took 23 years before she caught it. I had a different lady on the phone. She had not had sex in 15 years, and now suddenly she had symptoms. So she was not looking for Tom, Dick, or Harry to find out which one it was she caught it from, because there's just no way after 15 years of trying to work out which of her partners it was. So yes, we do that, but it is pointless because you absolutely cannot know who you caught it from. And mostly you will catch it from a person who does not know that he or she has got it. Because if they knew they had it, they would be in a position to take precautions. And it's the ones who don't realize that quote, infected hair follicle is actually herpes simplex. That little cut is actually herpes simplex who pass it on.
People generally catch it from people who don't realize that they have it. So the emotions I went through when I first got it was regret for being reckless and self-destructive. And excuse me, but once I found out the facts, I felt much better knowing when I did know that I'd likely picked it up somewhere in the 90s, when I was with somebody that I was happy with and in a good relationship, rather than the idea that I'd picked it up from a recent you know, going to a nightclub and getting drunk after a breakup in a rough time during my life. So that helped things a lot. But I was initially as devastated as many of the people who call us are. And I had many of the same concerns. You know, will I have to use special STI dating sites for the rest of my life? Will I have to, you know, use condoms, you know, long into meaningful relationships for the rest of my life and that kind of thing? But I now know the facts, and the facts are the cure psychologically. And it's mostly a psychological condition.
Yeah, I think very, very similar kind of feelings. That when I first saw that, first of all, a text message telling you that you're positive. I was in the office, I remember that day. Freaked out, ran into a meeting room, started crying. And my friend came in, she's like, what's happened? I was like, I've got herpes. But after that, I kind of was like, okay, now I need to find out what I need to do, how I need to manage this. What does it actually mean? And the GP that I called at the time was he informed me quite a lot about what I needed to do and what could be done, taking acyclovir and things like that. And just kind of managing what the triggers might be. But for a long while, I felt almost a bit dirty, a little bit uncertain of how people would view me, partners would view me. I was with somebody at the time, and he was fine with it. I mean, he kind of had questions, obviously, and that's where the leaflets that HVAE provide are so valuable, because I sent that to him and he was like, okay, cool, I'm fine, it's good to know. And even for myself, just reading up everything that you guys give to members, it really helps settle the mind, and helps you come to terms with it, and that it's so normal and so many people have it. And you know, it takes a while to kind of get your head around it. And now I'm in a place where I'm just like, oh yeah, okay, I've got it. And I will tell people quite easily now, here now doing it on a podcast.
How did you come across HVA? How did you find them?
Oh, I literally Googled, because I felt like I needed somewhere to go to get help or something. And I can't remember if it was actually the GP that sent a link to it. I'm not sure. Anyway, I came across you online and signed up for the membership, and ordered the ointment and creams that you have, and the tablets as well, which are very good, which have all helped. And yeah, the Facebook group has been really good to kind of just know that you're not alone in it. And I think that's the most important thing, knowing that you're not alone. And there are so many other men and women who have this, who, you know, freaking out just like you are. And it's really comforting.
Good to know. By tablets, I assume you're talking about our immune system boosters. Yes. Was it the olive leaf or the Elogen?
I was taking both for a time.
Okay.
Yeah, when I first was diagnosed. Yeah, they were really good. Yeah.
They both do essentially the same thing, and they help your body to run better. They help your immune system to run better. So, you know, with or without herpes simplex, it's good stuff.
Yeah, in a general sense, right, for your immunity. Yeah, it's
sure.
Good.
Yeah.
But I would never actually suggest that you need to start taking pills right away. Nobody expects to take pills because they had a facial cold sore once upon a time. So yes, they're very useful for people who are getting a lot of outbreaks. But since there's a good chance that a person doesn't get a lot of outbreaks, I always say just wait and see. If you need them, yes, we can give you advice. But with luck, you won't need our advice. Do you see what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. I took them for a time, and then I did stop them afterwards because I wasn't getting very frequent outbreaks.
Good.
And I haven't I kind of began to recognize the signs of when I would get something. And then I was like, okay, just be a bit more careful around this time. It's usually if I've got a cold and then have sex. So it's like, I have to maybe not. And then even the acyclovir, I don't even take that anymore, even when I have an outbreak, because it doesn't, for me personally, it doesn't really reduce the amount of time by much. So I kind of just have an outbreak and it's like about a week or so. And it just clears. The cream is quite good in like if there's any discomfort. But otherwise, yeah.
And when you say cream, I'm assuming you mean the cream that we get in from Germany and not the acyclovir cream that you can buy online.
No, I think it's called, is it the Loma?
Yeah, Loma Herpan. It's a herbal cream that we buy in from Germany. The science is that it blocks the access point. So when the virus tries to get into the skin cell, it can't, because you have blocked the access point with this cream. Brilliant stuff. Stops outbreaks very well indeed.
Yeah, it's very good. As soon as I kind of feel a little something, I'm like, okay, I need to use that. So it's very good.
Great.
And it's a natural thing as well, so it's great. I wasn't keen on using this is personal preference, the acyclovir constantly, but I know for some people they do prefer to take it and need to take it.
Yep, acyclovir pills are very good pills in that they work on virus and not on humans' cells. So they work, if you like, as a contraceptive pill for virus. While you're taking them, the virus cannot multiply and come out and make outbreaks. And when you stop taking them, of course, you're back to square one. They don't have any long-term effect at all. But they're great because they don't actually do anything to human bodies.
Okay, I didn't realize that. That's really good to know.
All treatment for herpes simplex is an option, not a requirement. I would only recommend acyclovir to somebody who was getting 6 or more outbreaks a year. The only time I would recommend it, if they were getting less than that, is if they were really that freaked out and that worried. I would reluctantly, recommend it just for their own peace of mind, because it's a very safe drug. It won't do you any, providing your kidneys are in good working order and there's no issues with those. It's a very safe drug. And if you take it when you don't need to take it, you'll simply pee it out of your system.
What is the kind of maintenance for somebody who might have herpes or who does have herpes?
Well, if they don't get symptoms, there is nothing that they need to do. So there is no requirement for any drugs at all. They can, if they wish, take them. And therefore, for people who are having outbreaks too frequently, the pills can be wonderful. But nobody with facial cold sores is expecting to take treatment all the time. There is no need for people with genital cold sores to take treatment all the time either.
The best thing is a good night's sleep, healthy diet, avoid stress if possible. I know that's easier said than done in many cases, and a good night's sleep.
And when people are newly diagnosed, how have you found that it's kind of affected their relationships, or initially at the beginning, because they're obviously going through a lot of emotions? How has it, or how have you found that it affects relationships in that way?
It's very important here to say that it only affects the relationships of people who, for one reason or another, have become worried about this thing. The virus itself has absolutely no effect on people whatsoever. If people have the virus facially, they don't bother to think about how it's going to affect their relationships. It's only if they have been Googling stuff and have learnt from Google that having this virus is a disaster and their relationships will be affected. The other thing to remember is that we only hear from the people who are upset about it, worried about it, and have not been told that it's only a cold sore that happens to be genital instead of facial, and you need make no extra fuss than you do if you'd happen to suddenly notice a facial cold sore. And nobody expects that to be a problem in their life. So it's a self-selected group for one reason or another who contact us for the help that we can offer them, which is advice and information on how incredibly common the virus is, how it's not going to damage your health, how it can be lived with perfectly well with no problem whatsoever, unless you frighten yourself by reading stories off the internet. So don't go reading stories off the internet and frightening yourself.
Wow, shock horror. Dr. Google is not so medical, huh?
It's more a case of what not to do than what to do when you first get this virus. And the first rule of thumb we give people is stick to our website for your information, because we simply can't vouch for all the stuff that's out there on the internet. And it's not just that there's misinformation out there, although of course there is. So for example, people will read that a condom doesn't give 100% protection against transmission. No, it doesn't, because the reason for that is a condom won't cover the entire body. And, so not everyone gets outbreaks on the shaft of their penis. Some people might get outbreaks on their hand or their elbow or, anywhere else. This seems so obvious saying it now, but sometimes these things are written in a way that would imply that the virus can somehow penetrate the latex.
Right.
And no, it can't.
It can't. There's also all these like kind of horror stories around, and they still go around, like comedians joke about it. They like to make herpes jokes about, promiscuity and oh, you must have been with someone, or you must have been sleeping around, or people who've got herpes, they're not great people to be with, kind of thing, which is really, really damaging.
Yes, well, they will be.
I've been with, not been with people, but I've had people that I've been in company with make a joke about it while I'm there, and at the time I wasn't strong enough or felt confident enough to say anything about it. But if it happens again now, I will be. But it's like you sit there and you're like, I don't sleep around, but I've got it. I'm a normal person with a normal life. I don't go sleeping around with everyone. So it can be really like disheartening and hurtful.
Sorry, I was going to say, when comedians make comments like that, they are, without realizing it, alienating about a third of their audience.
Exactly.
Third of their audience
Exactly.
that know that they have it.
Yeah, exactly. This is kind of what prompted me to want to do this podcast in the first place, and like say I have it myself, because especially in our culture, like Karina said in the beginning, we barely even talk about sex, which is in itself a really, not a great thing. So talking about these things, no, they're not going to be talking about it. So we felt like it was an important subject to bring up, and better to have someone who has it and who's lived the experience to, discuss it. So hopefully this will help people reach out to you.
I really hope it does, Lena. I wasted 2 years in my early 30s, convinced I would never have sex again because I'd caught this virus. And that's what the media was telling me. And then, of course, I got good information from the Herpes Virus Association and was able to resume a normal life.
That's
so
right.
that would be the message that I would want people to hear. Get good information, and then you can resume normal life. Don't rely on the stupid stories on the internet to affect how you live your life.
Exactly.
I think that's
you
so
can live
true.
a very happy life.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? That the damage it does from all these myths that kind of go about, and and we kind of briefly spoke about a couple about the people that have herpes are always sleeping around. They're somehow dirty. They're somehow the minority. And I mean, I don't know the statistics of kind of how many people in BAME communities have herpes or have, any sort of virus. And
the same, my dear, the same. I mean, if you've had sex, you can have caught it. It's as simple as that. You'd only have to have sex once to have caught it. I spoke to a 13-year-old virgin who had caught it from the fingers of a little boy. They were both virgins, but he happened to have a whitlow on his finger, and therefore this virgin had genital herpes. So it absolutely is not limited to the people who have sex with too many different people. It's just foolish to try to make that link at all.
Yeah, children get this virus. They pick it up from kindergarten or an enthusiastic auntie.
So where's this myth?
Enthusiastic auntie.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the thing, though. People just don't realize it.
Yeah, because I'm kind of wondering where these myths then came from in the media. Is it?
Okay, that's a very good story. The virus was, as I said, absolutely not a thing. In the 70s, somebody did some research on your emotional reaction to having caught an STI. As you came out of the clinic, they asked for your emotional reaction to your new diagnosis. Herpes simplex was not on their list. Nobody mentioned it. That's so not how it would happen nowadays. So acyclovir was invented. The drug company needed people all to be aware that there was a drug to treat genital herpes. In creating the market for herpes drug, they created the stigma as well.
Wow.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, not amazing in the like, this is great way, but amazing in the corporations are really quite rubbish, aren't they?
Well, I hope I said it carefully enough that I'm not actually saying they intended to create the stigma,
No,
because we can't know that for sure.
Yeah.
But certainly, if not an intended consequence, certainly an unintended consequence of their advertising campaign. New drug to treat herpes simplex, genital herpes, new drug, get your new drugs here, was that people suddenly learned that having genital herpes was a total disaster, and they absolutely needed to spend all their available cash, because remember, this was done in America, where you have to buy your own drugs. You need to spend all your available cash on herpes simplex treatment. As we've said earlier, absolutely, you do not need to treat it. Every outbreak will get better all by itself.
From a societal and psychological point of view, the more that there are, great podcasts like this going out, and more information about it, and anything that gets people talking about it, including stand-up comedians, if they're doing it properly and mocking the stigma rather than mocking people that have it, then things will improve. But until somebody stands up and speaks out and says, no, hang on a sec, I'm not having that. You can't take the mickey out of that, which people do. If a comedian pokes fun at race or gender, then that's the first thing that will happen. But it's still acceptable to mock this virus, and people just don't know what they're talking about when they do.
Yeah.
And I often imagine a scenario where jokes are being written for a comedian or script being written for an American high school movie, and someone in the writing room goes, oh, we could put a herpes joke in here. And the trouble is, the people who do have herpes at that point do not say, no, you can't, it'll alienate a third of your audience. They just think to themselves, oh, I'd better let them do that, because otherwise everyone's going to know I've got herpes.
Wow, this is it.
The stigma is self-perpetuating, which is just such a shame.
Yeah, I can imagine it's that inability to speak out and to say that, yes, I have it. No, it's not a big deal. So what? That confidence, which understandably a lot of people might not have when you have all this stigma, all these myths, especially if you don't know anyone directly or know of anyone that has it, then it can just feel like I'm the only person that has it. This is the rarity. I'm the exclusion. I'm the exception, when everything we spoke about on this podcast is you are absolutely not the exception. You are probably the majority in this case.
Yeah.
Quite so. By the age of 25, if you don't carry this virus, you are an unusual individual. If you are 35 and you don't carry this virus, you're dead weird. Because it is so common.
So how do you test yourself to see if you have herpes? How would you find out? How do you know?
You cannot test for it. On the internet, there are online clinics that will sell you the idea that you should have a blood test for this, but that is ridiculous. Do not pay money for it. The only way you can know whether you've got genital herpes is for a swab, or any herpes simplex, is for a swab to be taken from an actual sore and for that to be tested for herpes simplex virus. The antibody tests will give out a wrong result, telling you have it when you don't, 1 time in 10, and telling you don't have it when you do, 3 times in 10. These are people who've had positive swab tests, so they know they have it. They later go for a blood test to find out whether it's type 1 or type 2. And the blood test comes back negative because they're running a perfectly satisfactory immune response, but with a level of antibodies that is too low for the test to show a positive result. So no, don't go. It's not part of an STD check. The NHS is perfectly happy that by old age, everyone's caught this virus. It really doesn't matter. As we've said, medically, it's utterly unimportant. It's a socially important condition, not a medically important condition. And therefore, we find in communities where the issues of perhaps finding enough to eat or getting work are more, are vital. People don't worry about having a spot on somewhere on their anatomy. In Mexico, a doctor told me we call it the American disease, and a doctor working in Saudi Arabia said it's a disease that only affects women who are rich enough to read American magazines.
I like that one.
I like that one. That's pretty funny. That could be the tagline of our podcast. Listen, thank you both so much, all three of you. Thank you so much for coming and talking about this quite openly, quite transparently. And as we've all said, I really hope that there are listeners out there that suddenly find this a little less scary and, a little less daunting and less alienating. If they do want to reach out to you, how can they do so? Where can they find you?
Take a look at our website. That's herpes.org.uk. Remember the UK on the end, otherwise you end up in an American website. You don't want to do that. We on that page, on the contact us page, you'll find telephone numbers for us. You can send us emails, and we've got a Facebook page as well, Herpes Virus Association. So you can look at our posts on the Facebook page as well.
And remember, if you don't have it, you're the weirdo. So
yeah, if you don't have it, you're just not.
What are you doing?
Yeah, thank you guys. This has been really, really good. And I can vouch for your organisation being a part of it. And it has helped me so much. So I really do hope that there are people listening that do reach out for help, because it's going to benefit you so much.
Oh, Mikey, you made it till the end. I'm so happy. Well, listen, if you enjoyed what you heard and you want to hear more, subscribe to the podcast on, wherever you are listening to this. We are on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Deezer, TuneIn, Alexa, you name it, we're there. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on an episode. We also are on Instagram, which houses loads of behind-the-scenes audio snippets, polls, memes, and ways for you to get involved. So go follow us on Bold, Brown and British. That's the handle. And until next time, keep safe, my wonderful samosas.